All right, welcome back, everybody. Our next speaker is going to be Professor Jim Baber. Professor Jim, how's it going? Oh, can't hear you.
There we go. Very good.
Awesome, loud and clear. So, Professor Baber is going to be speaking on the failed and changing prophecies of the Watchtower. I'm really interested in this since I'm a little more familiar with the doctrinal side of things when it comes to JWs, not so much some of their failed prophecies. So I hope everyone in the audience is looking forward to it as well. So quick bio. Professor Jim Baber has been a Christian since 1990. In 93, he began a ministry, outreach, and study of Jehovah's Witnesses. And by 97, his study and outreach expanded to include many other groups such as Seventh-day Adventists, Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, Church of Christ, Islam, Christadelphians, Children of God, etc. He continues his study of non-Christian religions and currently runs a YouTube channel dedicated to exposing Seventh-day Adventism. He possesses an MA in Business and an MA in Humanities. His thesis topic was a historical view and analysis of English Qurans from 1649 to 2005. He is currently an adjunct college business professor and a university continuing education instructor. So looking forward to this. With that, Professor Baber, take it away.
Very good. If I can get you to bring up my file that I uploaded, we can get started. Excellent. All right. Got a lot of slides to go through, and a lot of them are going to be here just for reference. So I'm going to, show you some literature, but then I'll read the points here. So we got 100+ years of failed prophecies. Now, I want to make it absolutely clear, and you can see here on this slide. So I want you to know this one point here first. If you see a link below, an internet link, that's because I got it off the Watchtower website. If you don't, that's because I own it. And right over here next to me is everything that you're going to see quoted. If I quote it, I own it. And that's a really important thing with Jehovah's Witnesses because they don't trust photocopies or quotes from books. They want the original literature. And that's what you're going to see here. So they are God's channel. They tell us in this very book, does God have an organization? The inspired scripture tells us, well, he does. And then they go on to talk about who they are, right? Today, there's only a remnant of 144,000, but God has an organization and it's them. So look at this one here. In our day, the governing body of Jehovah's visible organization. There it is. The governing body is Jehovah's visible organization. This is important because what Jehovah's organization says, and he says it through the Watchtower, the Awake, and books, etc., is from God. So that's point number one. I could do a whole 40 minutes just on their God's channel. Now let's go on here. And why is it so important? Even recently in 2016, you can't understand the Bible without God's visible organization. So there's the foundation, there's the basis. When I quote Watchtower literature, I'm quoting words in essence that have been channeled from Jehovah God to the governing body to the average Watchtower member. And that's how it works. Now, the Watchtower magazine, the first one, they started producing literature in July of 1879. They are a non-Christian and anti-Trinitarian religion. Most of their doctrines come from the Seventh-day Adventist religion. Some of them haven't changed at all between Seventh-day Adventism and the Watchtower. Michael the Archangel, Jesus. A lot of the doctrines have changed. For instance, who is the 144,000? What's their idea of the remnant? They still use the same words and titles as Adventists, and Adventists are also a non-Christian anti-Trinitarian religion. But so that's where the origin or sources of a lot of Watchtower history. Now, the Watchtower history is littered with false prophecies. Here's some common replies that I want you to understand how to reply to them. They're going to make these three first arguments. You're going to show them a false prophecy. They're going to say, hey, we never claimed to be a prophet. Oh, we made mistakes. The light keeps getting brighter and brighter. So one way you can answer this, that they never claimed to be a prophet, is this. I can ask, so by that standard definition, prophet, right? Because that's what you're saying. And I can tell you I did this. I went and looked up all 300+ words in the Hebrew and Aramaic for the word prophet. And I found out quite a few prophets in the Old Testament never claimed to be a prophet. Daniel, Ezekiel, Joel are 3 examples. I would ask the Jehovah's Witness, hey, is Daniel a prophet? Now, I realize Jesus said he was, but that's not the criteria you set up. You said the prophet has to say they are a prophet to be a prophet. So, by that definition, Daniel's not a prophet, Ezekiel's not a prophet, Joel's not a prophet. I can say, see, that's a foolish argument. Because Deuteronomy 18:20 says, a prophet who speaks in my name. And that name means authority or power. And you can see the verse there in Acts 4 where it's actually used like that, because the high priest asks, by what name or authority are you coming to us? So there it is. A prophet doesn't say, I'm a prophet. It's when they invoke the word or God and come in his authority or power, that's claiming to be a prophet. They love to go to Jonah. Oh, we just made mistakes. Well, you know what? If you read Jonah 3, Jonah didn't make a mistake. Jonah did exactly what God said, warn Nineveh. So that's what I like to tell Job. When Jonah didn't make a mistake, he did exactly what God said. And when Nineveh repented, then God said, you know what? I'm not going to annihilate them. So it's not Jonah did not make a mistake, but they like to say that. Next, they love Proverbs 4:18. You will hear them say this to you. Oh, well, the path of the righteous gets brighter and brighter. Here's what I do. I say, oh, okay, let me go back there. So the path of the righteous gets brighter and brighter. I don't read verse 19 to them, but I set it up like this. I say, oh, okay. So you're telling me because the path gets brighter and brighter, the light gets brighter and brighter, that in previously you were in some form of gloom or darkness. And I get them to say yes. And then I'll say, well, why don't you read Proverbs 4:19? Who's in the darkness? Oh, the wicked. You just told me you're wicked because now you're in darkness. And I get them say, and then I say all this to say that is not the proper way to interpret Proverbs 4:18, by the way. So those are some of your most popular arguments. Now, this is a much more sophisticated one. And now, like I said, with the Watchtower, you have to have original literature. I have this 7 volumes that here called the Watchtower reprints. The February 1881 issue is really clear. This is what really New Light is. Most Jehovah's Witnesses don't know this. New light of truth never contradicts a former truth. They use it for contradictions all the time. But New Light says never contradicts Old Light. February 1881 Watchtower magazine. And then they go on to give you an example here in the blue text. So that's really what it means. So those are just some quick ways to answer them. But they'll say, here's the last one here. They say, well, we never claimed to be a prophet. And I love this magazine right here, April 1st, 1972, page 197. I quote it to them all the time. I know what it says on the page. Let's go look at page 197. And it says, Jehovah's not going to let his people be without a prophet. And then it goes on into the red underlines you can see here. He had a prophet to warn them. This prophet was not a man, but was a body of men and women. It was a small group of footstep followers of Jesus Christ, used to be known as International Bible Students. Today, they're Jehovah Christian Witnesses. They just made every Jehovah Witness a prophet. So yeah, you did claim to be a prophet. Remember what I said? They'll go, oh, Proverbs 4:18. New light can never contradict old light. So how does this work? They're stuck. So that's just some ways you can answer some of them here. Let's start with some false prophecies here. Let's start with 1874 and what they said. Millennial Dawn is a precursor to the set called Studies in the Scriptures. Essentially the same books, but they didn't changing them. So what did they say here on this page? Pastor Russell loved the Great Pyramid. He called it a divine witness. So he measured one of the passages, and you can see there, one of the passages of that Great Pyramid is 3,416 inches. And then he goes on to say, well, thus we take the passage and we do this, and the Great Pyramid proves 1874 is a time of trouble. There it is, 1874 is a time of trouble. Well, then we go to the Millennial Dawn. This is actually printed later. The first one you saw was 1891. Here's 1907. And what do? The pyramid now is 3,457 inches. And 1874 is not the time of trouble. It's 1914 now. They dropped 1874. So what did they do? Well, the Great Pyramid actually grew 41 inches from 1891 to the 1907 millennial dawn, when they wanted to get rid of 1874 and move it to 1914. They just changed the books. Didn't bother telling anybody. Let's go on to the next one. We're going to do 1914 and 1915 together. Here is Studies in the Scriptures, right, which was previously called Millennial Dawn. This one here is volume 2. I love volume 2. I use this one all the time. We consider it an established truth that the final end of the kingdoms of this world, that's the final end, kingdoms of this world are coming in 1914. Well, isn't that wonderful? 1914. Okay. Notice the date on this, 1907. Same book, published in 1927. And what do they say? It's an established truth that that kingdoms are going to end in 1915. Here they are changing their books again. Earlier, they said, oh, the world's going to end in 1914. Now, oh no, sorry, it's 1915. You're going to see a constant pattern here. When the dates are no longer any good for them, they're going to change the dates. Let's look at here. Studies in the Scriptures. This is volume 3. And it says that the deliverance of the saints, now take note of the words here, is going to take place sometime before. Pay attention to that word before. Before 1914 is manifest. This is a 1912 book. They're going to publish the same book in 1919. There it is. And what are they going to say? That the deliverance of the saints must take place very soon after 1914. Look what they did here. Same book, 2 different printings. When they knew the prophecy failed for 1914, the first one said before 1914, and then now it's, well, very soon after 1914. Now we're going to go to 1918. I'm just going to give you this one example. By the way, there's so much more I could show you before all these false prophecies, but because of limited time, I'm just going to show you these right here. Let's look at 1918. I love what they say about 1918. This is volume 7 of Studies in the Scriptures. And on this page, they're talking about Christendom. And they're also talking about Jerusalem. And they said, well, as Jerusalem was destroyed, of course, in Watchtower Theology at 606 BC, which it's not, but that's another topic for another day. They said, and Christendom is going to be destroyed between 1914 and 1918. I've had Jehovah Witnesses at my door. I've had Studies in the Scriptures in my hand. I open it up to this page and I go, Christendom's destroyed in 1918. And then I look around and I go, we're here. And there you go. I go, this is called a false prophecy. And of course, then they'll default to what we saw earlier. Oh, the light gets brighter and brighter. Oh, it was a mistake. And well, now you know how to answer that. So 1874, 1914, 1915, 1918, all false prophecies. Let's go to 1925. This one's kind of funny. This is a little hilarious in a way. So they started this 1925 false prophecy. Pastor Russell, the founder of this organization, died, and God has a sense of humor. He died October 31st, 1916. He died on Halloween. Now, Judge Rutherford, so we got new leadership taking over. And 1914 and 1915, 1874 has already failed. But they got it in their blood to keep predicting false prophecies. So now here they are in 1917, predicting another false prophecy. And this one here, it says that according Abraham is going to come back in 1925. And they started this really early. So here we are in 1917. They've already laid the groundwork. Abraham's coming back in 1925. This is perhaps the most famous quote for this 1925 false prophecy. It's in a paperback booklet called Millions Now Living Will Never Die. And here they are on this page, and they talk about this. And they say, and since the other scriptures definitely fix the fact that there will be a resurrection of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the other faithful ones of old, they're mentioning the saints, by the way, that are mentioned in Hebrew, that they are going to be resurrected in 1925. And then they go on to say, again, just to make sure you got it right, on page 97 of this book, Oh, the new order is coming. 1925 shall mark the resurrection of the faithful ones. And they're going to be on earth, you can see in the red text, in 1925. And millions now living, remember this point, millions now living will never die, is what they say. So there they are, pretty confident in 1920. 1925. This is a much more scarce book to find if you're looking for this literature. This one's called The Way to Paradise from 1925. What do they say in that book? We should therefore expect shortly after 1925 to see the awakening of Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, etc., and all the great worthies of the book of Hebrews are going to come in 1920. So they've been building this up since 1917. And here's why. This is an old photograph of a house called Beth Sarim. They built this house for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, etc., because when they were going to get resurrected, they needed a place to live. And that's why they built this house in San Diego for them to go live. Look to the very left of this picture here, you see a garage. I've read and watched Tower literature in that garage, and that's who you see here on the screen, by the way, is Judge Rutherford, second president. In that garage, they used to keep a Cadillac because, well, when Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and all of them are going to get resurrected, then they had to have a car to drive around in. So they kept a car in that garage for them. Now, when when this whole 1925 thing failed, this was actually a monument of embarrassment for the Watchtower. They sold this house in the 1950s to a Japanese doctor. That Japanese doctor died in the 1990s. And I had a chance, there's the modern picture of the house, to go to that house. It was a great time. When this Japanese doctor died, he's the one that bought it from the Watchtower. This house was empty. I drove up to this house. I was able to walk all the way around it. I was actually even able to walk into the garage that you saw where the Cadillac was that was going to drive around Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in 1925. It was just a thrill for me. So I took a bunch of pictures and had a chance to walk around this silly house. Now, here's something else that's quite comical about this house. This is the Golden Age magazine in 1930. This house was actually deeded in trust to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all the worthies that are mentioned in Hebrew. It's just amazing. So they reprinted this deed in this March 19, 1930 Golden Age magazine. And you can see here, it's a deed, Joseph F. Rutherford, and then they go on to show this here, and then they say, well, both the grantor and the guarantor, Rutherford, we're going to Bible testimony, Jehovah God, the evidence of his kingdom. And look at this second text of red lines here. I don't want to read all of it to you, but he basically is saying that the governing body and authority, these invisible men, are going to come back. They defined those men again. Look in the middle here. David, Israel, Gideon, Barak, Samson are all going to come in. Chapter 11 of Hebrews, and they're going to move into this house. But look what they say in the next paragraph. The condition herein is that the said Watchtower Bible and Tract Society are going to hold the title in perpetuity in trust for the use of the men named above. They're holding Beth Sarim for the men named above. They're holding it in trust for, David's going to come back and move into this house because they're going to end up using this in their house. This is ridiculous. When I first found this out, I actually called a title company in San Diego. This is pre-internet time. And I said, hey, I want the title deed that you have on the books. And I gave them the address to Beth Sarim. And they kind of, on the phone, they were like, it's public record, but they were still like real suspicious of me. I said, look, here's what I'm doing. Here's what I want to see. I go, this house was actually deeded to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, etc. And the person on the phone just started laughing. And they said, no way. I said, yeah, show me the deed. And they went into the books. They found it. They faxed me a copy. And I got my own fax copy from a title company in San Diego where they did exactly just that. Absolutely ridiculous. It stands today as a monument to this 1925 failed prophecy. But let's continue with the 1925 prophecy. So here we are now in 1920. And they say, well, suppose that we should be wrong. And our chronology of the kingdom, well, it doesn't get set up in 1925. Suppose we're off by 10 years and it's 1935. Then they go on to say, without a doubt, there are now millions of people on earth who will be living 15 years from now. So really, I love showing this Jehovah's Witness. I go, really? Millions of people living on earth that are alive 15 years from now. So then they go on to say, you can see the very last underlined red text, whether it be 1925 or 35, soon this is going to happen. They're very confident. Let's look at the next one. Now it's July of 1924. The year 1925 is a date. Definitely, read this carefully. Definitely and clearly marked in the scriptures, even more clearly than 1914. Well, how did that work out, right? That's the one we changed to 1915 when that one didn't work. But they say it's more clear than 1914. Then they say, but it would be presumptuous on the part of any faithful follower of the Lord to assume just what the Lord's going to do during that year. What a contradictory sentence. They say, oh, this is a really clear, certain date. And then they say, well, don't be presumptuous of what the Lord may do or not do during that year. More Watchtower doublespeak. They're really good at doing the doublespeak. Here we are now, January 1st, 1925. January, look what it says here. The year 1925 is here. With great expectations, Christians have looked forward to this year. Many have confidently expected that all members of the body of Christ will be changed to heavenly glory during this year. This may be accomplished. It may not be. They're getting cold feet. Look at the last part of it. Christians should not be so deeply concerned about what may transpire during this year that they would fail to joyfully do what the Lord would have them do. See, now that 1925 is here, they're getting a little scared because they're like, it may not happen. And they're the ones, and you've already seen it starting in 1917, where they said, oh, this is definitely and confidently going to happen. Millions now living will never die. Well, now it's September of 1925. This is the last one I'm going to show you for 1925. I love this one. This is funny. This is like humor. It is to be expected that Satan will try to interject into the minds of the consecrated that the thought that 1925 should see an end to the work and therefore it would be needless for them to do more. The devil made us do it. So there it is. There at the end of 1925, and it says, if you're a Jehovah's Witness and you think 1925 is going to be the end of it, that's Satan injecting it into your mind. So see, now they've totally backed off of it. Failed prophecy. Besserine stands to this day, and you can go drive by the house. I know lots of people do, and say, yeah, it's a monument to the failed prophecy of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. Let's go to the 1940s. A lot of Jehovah's Witnesses, even Christians, don't know so much about the 1940s. 1914, 1925, pretty well known, but let's look at the 1940s. So what they did in the 1940s, Armageddon, once again, is right around the corner. So in this Watchtower magazine from November of 1938, talking about, well, should they get married now? Because Armageddon's coming. And look at what the underlying text here in red. No is the answer supported by the scriptures. Because you don't want to have children, and then Armageddon comes, because that's not good. And they'll tell us that here in this Watchtower magazine, again, from 1938. They'll say, the scriptures support the conclusion that the beginning of the filling of the earth, don't do this before Armageddon. Because then they quote Matthew 24, if you do this, you're going to get lots of woes. It's a woe from God to have children before Armageddon, so don't do it, because Armageddon is coming. It's right around the corner. And the last one here I'm going to show you is this from 1941. Heartens of children that had been deposited. Now, children, that's a book. That's this book right here from 1941. It was a book to children. So when it says cartons of children, I mean cases of this book have been deposited in the arena because they have summer conventions. And opened, and Judge Rutherford instituted the children, come, he's bringing the children, come, get a copy of this book, children. Now read this next piece of text here, real careful. Receiving the gift, the marching children clasped it to them, not a toy or plaything for idle pleasure, but the Lord's provided instrument for the most effective work in the remaining months before Armageddon. Remaining months. Here we are in September of 1941. and it's the remaining months before Armageddon. Another failed watchtower prophecy. But you know, these guys are like a moth to a light. It's just their nature. They can't help it. They don't stop, and they do it again. In 1975, which is a really famous one, a lot of witnesses are taught how to answer 1975. And I'll talk a little bit more about how to equip you to answer their arguments. So they started this 1975. So now we got this whole history, but they keep doing it. In this book, Life Everlasting and Freedom of the Sons of God, pretty easy book to find these days, 1966. There's a copy of the book. There's a title page. You can see everything there. And what's it say on page 29? According to this trustworthy Bible chronology, 6,000 years from man's creation is going to end in 1975. The seventh period of 1,000 years of human history begins in the fall of 1975. So it says, it continues, 6,000 years of man existence on earth are going to be up within this generation. Here they are now laying the groundwork that 1975 is going to bring about Armageddon. Same year, Awake magazine. You can see the title of the article was 6,000 Years Completed in 1975. And then this quote they have here. In what year then would the first 6,000 years of man existence and also the first 6,000 years of God's rest day come to an end? 1975. There it is again. So now they're building up 1975. Let me say this about the Watchtower. I typed in the comments a minute ago, the Watchtower is a dying religion, and they are. They're consolidating kingdom halls, they're collapsing kingdom halls, but the Watchtower always grew when they had things like this going on. And they grew during the 1975 false prophecy because then all the brothers and sisters are out doing all their field work, right? Knocking on our doors, standing in front of 7-Elevens and donut shops and other places, handing out their Watchtower because God's kingdom, Armageddon's coming, and you better hurry up and get in God's kingdom. Otherwise, when Armageddon comes, you're going to get destroyed. And so they get all spun up, and their numbers actually grow when they do this. Now, the Watchtowers kind of ceased doing this kind of thing that we see here in terms of false prophecies, and I've seen their numbers are going down. The average witness, they have no real purpose or reason to be out there peddling this false religion. So here they are in 1966, and they are growing big time because they are out telling everybody, you got to get in God's organization. That's like Noah's Ark. You better get into it because 1975, that means that's it. Now, I show them this. Now, Jehovah Witnesses freak out on the street when I show them this because this is a kingdom ministry. This is internal literature. They don't offer this to the general public. They see this and they go, oh, no, you're an apostate. Where'd you get a kingdom ministry? And I say, well, eBay. And you can find almost everything on eBay now. So it's an internal piece of literature, but look at what it says. Just think, brothers, there are about 90 months left before 6,000 years of man existence on earth is completed. There they are again. Now, this is internal. They're speaking to Jehovah Witnesses. This magazine, this piece of literature is not for the general public. It says, do you remember what we learned at the assembly last summer? The majority of people living today will probably be alive when Armageddon breaks out. Have you heard that before? Millions now living will never die. Millions will be alive 15 years from now, as they said in 1920. Here they are in 1968 saying virtually the same thing, but they're building it up. Here's a Watchtower magazine from 1968. And it says, why are you looking forward to 1975? No one, you've been telling us this since 1966. Well, of course, right? So what did they say about it here in 1965 or 1968? Our chronology, however, which is reasonably accurate, and they say, but admittedly not infallible, at best points to the autumn of 1975 as 6,000 years of man's existence. So see, they're getting cold feet again, just like they did in 1925. Oh, well, you know, we're fallible, but we still think it's 1975. And then they give, between the two red line that I gave you here, they give you an example of how, well, maybe we're off a little bit here or there, but the conclusion is at the bottom. They say, even if we're off, it's only going to be a difference of weeks or months, not years. 1975, weeks or months, not years. Right. Then they go on to say again, 1968. I love this Awake magazine. Look at the cover. It's later than you think. All the hype and hysteria for 1975 is going full bore at this time. Then they say this, that 7-year period will evidently finish in the autumn of 1975. There it is. Now they're getting cold feet. Does this mean that the above evidence positively points to 1975 as the time for the complete end of the system of things? Then they go on to say, since the Bible does not specifically state this, no man can say. However, of this we can be sure. The 1970s will certainly see the most critical times mankind has yet known. You see what they do here? They're doing it here just like they did in 1925. Well, on one hand, we're really certain it's coming in the fall of 1975, but the Bible really doesn't say. We're really not sure. Getting cold feet again. Another habit of theirs. Here they are. Here's another internal magazine, just like the first one you saw from March of 1968. Because here's what the average Jehovah's Witness will say to you. They mean we, the organization never taught 1975. It was some excited brothers and sisters running around telling the world that 1975 was going to end. That's not true. That's what they're taught today. And when I go out on the street and talk to Jehovah's Witnesses, I go out on the street with the actual literature that you see here on the screen in my hand. And I say, no, it's not the brothers. The organization taught it, and they taught it right here. Look at this. And that's why it's important to have original literature with the Watchtower, because they don't accept photocopies. They won't accept your word. But if I show them from Jehovah's little happy organization what they wrote, I say, look at what they wrote. Now they have to believe it. And here's what they wrote. It says, yes, since the summer of 1973, there have been new peaks and pioneers every month. Pioneer is a super duper Jehovah's Witness, because a pioneer Jehovah's Witness is one that puts in extra hours going out doing what they call field work. So you got average Jehovah's Witnesses, then they got the super spiritual Jehovah's Witnesses that they call pioneers. So they've been adding pioneers. See, they added during this whole thing a 34% increase. We're talking about members. Does not that warm our hearts? Reports are heard of brothers selling their homes and property and planning to finish out the rest of their days in this old system. Wow. They're selling their homes and property and planning to finish out the days of this system. I met a man. I went to the Jehovah's Witness convention in Dodger Stadium many years ago. So I'm standing out front, handing out tracts, talking to Jehovah's Witnesses, and some guy came up to me, and his teeth were all messed up because he was a product of this. He says, as a little kid, he had extraordinarily bad teeth. His parents said, we're not going to spend the money to fix them because in 1975, it's all over. You don't need to get your teeth fixed. Jehovah's going to fix your teeth in the new kingdom. But it didn't come. And he was all messed up because of that. So I saved the best for last. This is a very popular book. I happen to have it right here. So they first produced this book in 1968. And what's it say in 1968? They're doing a quote. A former United States Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, declared that our time is, quote marks, a period of unequaled instability, unequaled violence. And then it says he warned, quote marks start again, and this is the important one. I know enough what is going on to assure you that in 15 years from today, this world is going to be too dangerous to live. And what do they quote from? They quote from U.S. News and World Report, June 13th, 1960. Here it is, and you're going to see this here in a minute. So the world's so dangerous in 1968, 15 years from now, it's going to be too dangerous to live. And the Watchtower loves to say that. Well, they revised this book in 1981. So what did they do when they revised it in 1981? You can see it starts off the same. A former United States Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, declared that our time is a period of unequaled instability and violence. Great. Then it says, based on what he knew was going on in the world, it was his conclusion that soon this world is going to be too dangerous to live. Is that what you just saw a minute ago? Did it say soon the world is going to be too dangerous? No, it said 15 years, the world is going to be too dangerous. Here we are again in 1968. Change the date, change the books. In 1968, he said, in 15 years from today, this world's going to be too dangerous to live. And now it's, this world is going to be too dangerous to live. But you see what they quoted from, which is the U.S. News and World Report from June of 1960, which I've already held up and showed you. Here is the magazine. Let me show you the magazine, because we seem to have a problem here with this quote in these two books. One says soon it's going to be too late and too dangerous to live in. And then the other one says, well, in 15 years from now, it's going to be too dangerous to live in. So here's that very magazine. And page 116, as they quote in the Watchtower, is the beginning of the article. And then page 119, well, I'm going to show you the actual quote here in a second. But here's the two Jehovah Witness books. 15 years from today, the world's going to be too dangerous to live. And then they say, well, soon the world is going to be too dangerous to live. But here's what I can tell you from the quote. Matter of fact, let me say this. What I'm showing you here, I didn't say this, sorry about that, is the actual quote from the magazine. Here's the actual quote from the magazine. And here in 1968, this is what they quoted, and it's accurate. But when they redid their book in 1981, see, they left off all this text above that I highlighted because they had it in the 1968 issue. So what they did was they added the word soon. This world is going to be too dangerous to live in. It's true. He said this world's going to be too dangerous to live in, but he didn't say soon because the actual quote says 15 years. So they actually changed this man's quote in 1981 in the actual magazine. Just a deceptive organization. Last one. Most Jehovah Witnesses and most Christians aren't familiar with this one. I'm gonna get my magazine out here because I want you guys to see this. There's the individual Watchtower magazine, individual issue, and then at the end of the year, which they don't do so much now, but they printed bound volumes of the magazines they printed for all year. So you're going to look at these two covers and go, oh yeah, I think they're the same. Watch out. So here's the original volume of the original issue. They thought how thrilling that must have been. Paul and Barnabas, they're out doing a missionary, right? And in speaking of Paul and Barnabas, they finish it by saying this. This Apostle Paul, was also laying a foundation for a work that would be completed in our 20th century. Look what they just did here. If the Apostle Paul is laying a foundation for preaching work that was going to be done or completed in the 20th century, December 31st, 1999, at midnight, it's all over. It's done. They predicted another date here in this magazine. And I remember going out on the street and showing this Jehovah Witnesses, because you know what they did? When they produced the bound volume, they did, here's the bound volume. You think it's the same issue. It's got the same cover, but look what they did to it. They changed the quote from, it says now, he was laying a foundation for a work that would be completed not in the 20th century, but in our day. Here we are again. Change the date, change the magazines from 20th century to our day. Deceptive. I want you to remember this. You can look at all these false prophecies. How do we know a false? Jesus told us how to recognize false prophets. Christians often use Matthew 7:15-20 wrong. And speaking of fruits, like they're good works. No. In this case, Jesus is telling us, how do we recognize? How do we recognize them? We're going to recognize them by their fruits. And the fruits of these false prophets and the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society is false prophecy, starting from 1874 to the year 2000. So with that, I'm going to end it here. You can end the slideshow and the presentation. And I'm open for, by the way, any questions in the panel where I can talk about this literature that you see here and maybe the importance or how to get it or etc. But it is absolutely important if you're going to go out, especially if you're going to go out on the street and they knock on my door and I'm running back here to my library and I'm pulling out stuff, because then I'm going to go deal with them at my front door, and I'm going to show them in their actual literature, because it has the greatest impact. Anyway, so let me turn it back over to you guys.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Professor Baber. It's wild to see just the amount of years in that one slide in your presentation, just year after year after year, changing date. This is going to happen. It doesn't come. And oh, by the way, we might be wrong, but don't worry, because we're not actually wrong if we're wrong.
And they changed the books.
Yeah, you would think if you're saying "Thus saith the Lord," you wouldn't have to qualify. I might be wrong. Saying that Jehovah could be wrong, bit of an issue. But thanks again. We will have you back up for the ending panel with the rest of the speakers. So again, if anybody has any questions during or after any of the presentations, please drop them in chat. We'll be having a live Q&A at the very end. And we will be having Vocab Malone up next. So stick around. We will be right back.